Dobro jutro svima.
Good morning, everyone. I do hope that you can hear me well. Yes, Maya, we can hear you well. Thank you. Once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar entitled Thinking for Sustainability, Strategic Environmental Assessment. This webinar is organized within the project for development of the strategy and action plan, environmental action plan for Bosnia and Herzegovina, BiH ESAP 2030 plus, implemented by the Stockholm Environment Institute and the company Enova and Zener as local partners. It is funded by the government of Sweden. Within the development of this strategy, we formed 7 thematic working group, and we adopted a participatory approach to develop this strategy. My name is Mara Maretic-Tiro, and I am the lead expert of the working group 7, which covers the environmental management, together with the co-lead expert, Snežana Mihajlović. My colleague Snežana and myself will moderate today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to get a better insight in the development of strategic environmental assessment within the ESAP BiH 2030 plus, and exchange of experience with members from other countries and experts from other countries. We have here today Mr. Milija Čabarkapa from Montenegro. We also have a guest from Spain and Mr. Vedat Sulic, João Pedro Silva, together with Bosnia and Herzegovina. He will have a presentation on the strategic environmental assessment for the project ESAP BiH 2030 plus. The expert will discuss why and how the public should be involved in the strategic impact assessment, and while the role of the relevant institution is crucial for the completion of this project, the expert will also speak about the opportunities for the relevant responsible authorities and provide details on the elements of the strategic environmental assessment. In addition to this, they will present the main experience in neighboring countries and some member states of the EU in the SEA process. As I previously mentioned, we will also learn about the current state of the strategic environmental assessment implemented in this project. May I just make a note about this event, given the fact that this event will take place in form of a webinar. All the participants can ask questions and approach the environment, and you have the option to do so. You have the option questions and answers. You cannot directly intervene and ask questions. So any questions you may want to ask, you should ask through the option question and answer. Within the panel discussion, which will take place after the presentations, the guest experts will provide answers to your questions. The questions will be provided directly in the Q&A option or alive. You also can use the chat option, and you can use it if you have some technical issues or you have problems to follow the webinar, and our local partner will help you if you ask for assistance through this option. That would be all for the beginning. We will first see the promotional video about the strategic environmental assessment, which was prepared within the project for the development of the environmental strategy of Bosnia and Herzegovina, ESAP BiH 2030 plus.
Društava, gradova i regija. Odluke koje donose utiču na kvalitet našeg života i zato su veoma važne. Bosna i Hercegovina priprema strategiju i akcioni plan okoliša koji se skraćeno nazivaju ESAP BiH 2030+. Ovaj dokument će odrediti ciljeve zaštite okoliša te najvažnije aktivnosti u Bosni i Hercegovini do 2032. godine. Dokument će sadržavati 4 strategije i akciona plana za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, Federaciju Bosne i Hercegovine, Republiku Srpsku i Brčko distrikt. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš SPUO biće provedena kako bi se već u ranoj fazi priprema u obzir uzeli sve relevantni okolišni, društveno-ekonomski i problemi održivosti. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš će ukazati na sve značajne efekte na okoliš i društveno-ekonomske aspekte koji proizilaze iz ESAP-a. Ponudit će alternativna rješenja i mjere za ublažavanje negativnih utjecaja. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš se provodi paralelno sa izradom ESAP-a u skladu sa direktivom o SPUO EU. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš biće provedena na sva 4 nivoa vlasti u skladu sa važećim propisima. Bitan element strateške procjene je da omogući uvezanost i analizu stavova različitih interesnih grupa. Zbog toga će završni izvještaj o SPUO kao i nacrt ESAP-a biti prezentirani javno, što će omogućiti svakom pojedincu da da koristan doprinos i iznese svoje mišljenje. Zajedno gradimo bolju budućnost, štiteći okoliš.
Hvala mojim kolegama na ovoj interesantnoj.
I thank my colleagues for this interesting presentation, and we will move on with our program. The first presentation, which we will hear today, discusses the implementation of SEA in Montenegro. The presentation will be made by Mr. Milija Čabarkapa from WWF Adria. He will present the way in which this assessment was conducted in Montenegro from the point of view of the responsible institutions and the NGO sectors, NGO sector, and he will provide some perspectives from Montenegro. Mr. Čabarkapa is a national coordinator for Montenegro in WWF Adria and an executive director of the NGO Eco team. During his career, he worked in public administration and the private sector. He has been in the SEO sector for almost 7 years, implementing several environmental protection and energy projects. Milija completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Montenegro's Faculty for Metallurgy and Technology. Mr. Milija, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. May I greet you all on my own behalf and on behalf of the organization. I represent WWF Adria, and let's not lose any more time. I will share my presentation immediately. I hope that you can all see the presentation and you can hear me well. Yes, we do confirm that we can hear you and see your presentation. Today, I will speak about the way in which the strategic impact assessment was implemented in Montenegro, and in this presentation, I will briefly touch the national framework, briefly reflect on the aims of the strategic impact assessment and the roles of relevant stakeholders in the strategic impact assessment. I will also share some experience in our process and touch upon weaknesses. The law on strategic impact assessment in Montenegro entered into force in 2008. The strategic impact assessment is conducted at the national level and the level of the ministries, national ministries, and at local level, that these are the secretariats we have at the local level. And later on, I will explain this in more details. Under the applicable legislation, without the approval of the responsible authority to the SCA, we cannot proceed with the development of the program or plan. Strategic impact assessment of plans and programs is conducted if their implementation is likely to have implications on the environment. The law mentions a number of areas such as agriculture, forestry, fishery, and so on. And there are situations where development of strategic impact assessment requires a decision on SEA. The number of SEAs processes at the national level is about 5 annually. During this period of 13 years, we considered and completed over 30 SEAs. There was only one single case where the approval was not issued. In all other cases, SEA was approved. Regarding the legal framework, the entire procedure of strategic impact assessment is regulated in the law on strategic impact assessment, which was adopted in 2008. At a later it was amended in order to be harmonized with SEA directive and our approximation strategy. This law is entirely aligned ultimately with the directive on SEA. Montenegro is also a party to the protocol to ESPO convention, and its implementation started in 2009. Briefly about the SEA objectives. The SEA objectives are also in compliance with the goal of the SEA directives, and these are to provide for full consideration of environmental and health issues in the preparation of plans and programs, to define clear, transparent, and effective processes for strategic assessment, to ensure public participation, to ensure sustainable development, and to upgrade the level of human health and environment protection. However, unfortunately, in some cases, these objectives have not been achieved in all SEA processes. As for the roles and responsibilities, as I said, the SEA is conducted both on the national and local level. If the planning or program is adopted by the National Assembly of Montenegro, the national authority is responsible for the entire procedure of SEA, including organization of public discussions and hiring a consultant, and the Agency for Environment approves the strategic impact assessment report. And however, if a municipality is adopting a plan or program, then the responsible secretariat in such municipality shall be responsible for the SEA process, while the agency still issues the approval or approves the SEA report. The Ministry of Ecology is in charge of the second instance administrative proceedings and other procedures if a plan or program is likely to affect the environment of other countries, including the implementation of SEA protocol to the ESPO convention. Now, I will address practical experience in the application of SEA. We have quite a poor experience to this end. What I can say that after nearly 13 years of the implementation of this assessment, the stakeholders in this process continue to see it as a necessary evil just in order to obtain approval to have their plan or program approved. strategic impact assessment is not seen as one of the most essential elements of the environmental protection, and it is not conducted in the spirit of the SEA directive. Of course, there are some examples of good practices, and I will mention them, but they are more exception than a rule. It is obvious that after all these years that we developed capacities across the levels. We organize multiple trainings, and we enhanced capacities at the national level in particular. But on the other hand, we have weak capacities at different levels. We have a very few people who are responsible and who deal with environmental issues, and we still have a problem with the lack of knowledge and skills in this area. One of the major problems in the strategic impact assessment is that we have poor application of the results of SEA or measures defined in SEAs. Under the law on strategic impact assessment, the authorities responsible for the preparation of a plan or program are not held accountable in case they fail to apply the measures defined in SEAs. They apply or seek to integrate them in the program. So it's up to them, and it is left to their readiness or willingness to integrate these measures in the plan or program. But it is also the fact that there are no measures which the inspection can use or apply to punish those who fail to apply the measures. So it is crucial to improve the law on strategic impact assessment so as to oblige the responsible authority that to integrate and apply the measures defined in SEA. This can be done through the law on SEA or law on spatial planning, where they can be obliged to integrate the measures designed in SEA through their urban planning design. What has happened over the past 10 years in Montenegro, the responsible institutions very often favored the sponsors of the programs and plans, although they were likely to adversely affect the environment, and they were under the pressure of the proponents or sponsors of the plans and programs. They favored them because they wanted to enable major investments in the countries. In such circumstances, and in the circumstances of insufficient application of the measures of SEA, the SEA has not fulfilled its major function, and it has not facilitated the sustainable development. What has been established is that this way of planning is rather short-sighted, and it fails to generate even assumed economic benefit. A good example to this end is our overly ambitious spatial plans and excessive building activities in the coastal area of Montenegro, which ruined the environment. The strategic impact assessment were seen just as a necessary evil, and the measures defined in them were not integrated in the plans. What should also be stressed is that the public participation and consultations were mainly conducted with the legally required minimum while efforts to apply various consultative methods and to enable continued involvement and quality exchange of information, ideas and solutions are exceptions rather than a rule. Whenever we have sensitive plans and programs which are likely to affect local population, in most cases, they're not informed of these facts. But the responsible authorities post the plan on a website, and we know that the local population rarely opens the website of the responsible ministries. Public hearings are often characterized by a lack of understanding and trust and highly incompatible positions and confrontations. Usually without taking any major conclusions. It is also important to mention that we have examples of good practices. When we were preparing strategic assessment for detailed spatial plan for overhead lines to Plevle, we held a number of public hearings as a result, the solutions and arrangements which were adopted also facilitated the integration of SEA conclusions, and we successfully changed the site of this converter. We also are developing a national plan for energy in Montenegro, and in parallel, we are conducting a strategic impact assessment. And I should also note that strategic impact assessment should be conducted in parallel with the relevant plan or program, and the findings of the strategic impact assessment must be integrated in the plan and program in such a way that the solutions which are not adequate must be modified in accordance with the findings and conclusions of the strategic impact assessment. As I said at the beginning, the responsible authorities in Montenegro still don't have obligation to integrate them.
Go back to these examples of the best practices. A working group has been established to monitor the implementation of the National Plan for the Energy. The task of the working group is to make sure that the whole process of a strategic assessment is legal in accordance with the law, and that the working group then reviews this report on strategic assessment and bring it at the appropriate level before releasing it into the public discussion procedure and the official procedure of adoption. The members of the group are various representatives of institutions, ensuring cross-sectorial presentation, and there are members from NGO sector. So this is one example of good practice. There is no systemic records of the measures pronounced for illegalities. The collection of fines is traditionally poor for all offenses in the area of protection of environment. As I mentioned earlier, with respect to strategic assessment, a weakness is this delayed implementation of procedure, and also, although according to the law, this decision on strategic assessment is made at the same time as the plan, the process itself starts typically much later when the basic planning solutions have already been established. Another weakness is very poor databases. We at the universities have very unsatisfactory databases. So in the report of strategic assessment, the data are incorporated that apply to a broader region than the one covered in the plan and the program. And as a result, we have weak environmental impact assessment and unsatisfactory measures. There is a hesitancy to recognize the negative impact and the attempt to promote a specific plan or program at any cost. lack of objectivity is yet another factor that harms the achievement of the objectives of the strategic impact assessment. Considering alternatives is another weak point, and contribution and participation of the general public is not at the desired level. So all in all, we have some examples of the good practice, but still after so many years implementation of the strategic environmental impact assessment, we are still having many problems. There is no essential understanding. It is seen more as the necessary evil, and the aim is not to ensure protection of the environment and sustainable development. This would be in the shortest about developments in Montenegro, and I remain here for your questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Milija. We are happy that you had we had the opportunity to hear about the implementation of strategic environmental impact assessment in Montenegro. I'm happy to hear that we have these examples of good practices, and I hope that this process will eventually fully be implemented. The questions for Mr. Milija can be asked in the Q&A section. We will now continue with our presentations. The next presentation is about management and strategic impact assessment. We will see a case study from Spain. We will hear Mr. Enrique Cifre, and he will explain the way how the strategic impact assessment is working at the national, regional, and local community level, or municipal level. And we will hear examples from the process of sustainable development of the region. I'm sorry, I missed the name of the region because the link is weak. Mr. Enrique Cifre has been working for 40 years in the sector for water, and he is deputy manager for the river basin. He has also been the program for sustainability, or the largest initiative for the marshes area in Spain. He is director of the Aquamet, which is responsible for implementation of the concept design and development of the structures for stabilization of the Spanish part of the Mediterranean region. He is currently working as advisor for many international agencies or organizations in the area of environment protection. In addition to these functions, Mr. Cifres has a PhD in planning water resources. Mr. Enrique Cifres, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share with you my experiences in some years ago in the implementation of the strategic environment assessment in Spain. As was said, I was in charge of some programs and plans that were affected in the beginning of the implementation of the European directive. Let me introduce very quickly the Spanish political structure. This note is not so complex as yours, but is a little complicated also. Before 78, we have 50 provinces. It was the division of Spain for some centuries. But after the constitution in 1978, the country was divided in 17 autonomous communities or regions, and 2 autonomous cities in the north of Africa, Ceuta and Melilla. And we had a new chart, but this chart was complemented with the status of autonomy of each of these regions. It's a very diverse country with different languages. We have 6 official languages, history and traditions. It's the addition of several kingdoms historically, but that means that the framework, the legislation is not the same in every part of the country. I am based in Valencia, and both cases I want to show you are located in Valencia. Sorry. You can see that we have 4 levels of administration. Really, 3 are operating: the central government, the autonomous regions or regional governments, and also the municipalities, and also the province are not disappearing because they are supporting the municipalities for some competencies or some responsibilities that they cannot deal with. This is, on the contrary, since the beginning of 20th century, we had the management of waters are based on the Basin scale. Was the first country in the world. Someone said that the Tennessee Valley Authority in United States was the first one, but not the first organization for basin management was in Spain in 1927 and 26, sorry. And this is the division of the country concerning the water sets or the basins. But they politically are quite different, and this means some troubles and concerns about the decision both in water management and in environmental issues. And this is this overlapping of both criteria creates some problems that is quite similar to transboundary waters. It really is in the same country, but due to the different way to manage the legislation and the competencies is very similar. You can see that the distribution of competences in this table. You can see that the central government has, for example, the responsibility in water resources and planning and management, the conception of the river basin management plans, but where there are some participation of local and regional governments. If we look at drinking water supply, the responsibility is from the municipalities, but they had no money for that, and the financing of these questions are in the power of the regional government, except in a few cases where the state declares as general interest and took the responsibility, and there in some cases is the state. Also in the sanitation is the same distribution. And regarding the environmental authority, is most of the competences are for regions historically, but when the projects are declared as general interested, then the state, the central state, can take the responsibility. It's not clear when it's possible or not, but normally it's decided in the parliament by a law. Our basin, where the cases, the study cases that I want to show are located, is the Hooker River Basin Authority. Covers this area, is more than 40,000 square kilometers and almost 5 million people living there. Is perhaps similar population as Bosnia and Herzegovina. We had a very old tradition, more than 1,000 years of the participation of the users and civil society in decision making. You can see, for example, the Tribunal de las Aguas, the water court in Valencia, is from Arab era, and is still working. Is the most ancient court still working in the world, and was a model for the creation of how must be managed the participation of the civil society in decision making. For example, the creation of the basin authorities was inspired in this kind of things, where the government has the power for granting water rights, for example, but the management of the water was under the responsibility of the users, and both were joined to create the first model of basin organizations. Nowadays, it's a little more complex because we are dealing with more questions, not only granting water, but also watching the water quality, to promote the new projects for water management, channelings, irrigation areas, dams, etc. And also the protection of the environment related to water. And this is the model for the basins. But let me remind a little about the Rio Summit principles, because it's the base for the conception of how we need to manage the public participation in environmental issues. You know that the principle number 10 of the Rio promotes the public participation in decision making when you are dealing with environment. Also, the access to the information as a key. And then the strategic environmental assessment has to be based on this principle. It's clear that 10 years later, in Rio plus 10, they found out that this principle was not fully implemented. Also, 10 years later, in Rio plus 20 was the same, and we wonder if in Rio plus 30 we will find out that we need still to learn a lot about the participation. And then I would like to go deeper later with this question, because we think this is a key for a good strategic environmental assessment. This principle was based on the idea that we have to combine the representative democracy by politicians with the participatory democracy led by the civil society by means of good participation processes. The reason is not generosity, but is the more participation is better decision making. This is an idea more pragmatic, and also that the involvement of the actors is a key for having a very sustainable solution. If we go directly to the legislation in Spain, you know that the Water Framework Directive and the Sea Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive, both were the mandate is to implement this directive in the national legislation. In the case of Spain, we had some delay in the implementation of the transposition of the SCA to the Spanish legislation. Was not easy because the complexity in the distribution of competencies I mentioned before, and both cases I want to talk about are located in this period, exactly when this transposition had to be implemented. In the structure of the basin management, all the society, all the stakeholders, really, civil society, but also municipalities, the NGOs, users, research institutions, universities, private sector, etc., are represented in the River Basin Organization. I'm sorry. The composition of the Water Council at national and basin level are including these stakeholders, and it seems that it could be enough, but we will see how we can find some difficulties and some conflicts in applying this idea. The structure of the River Basin Organization has two bodies. One of them has is the technical body with competencies in technical issues, in charge of the creation of the River Basin Management Plan, but with participatory bodies with different commissions, as the Basin Water Council, the Users Assembly, Committee for Exploitation and Operation of the Systems, the operation of the reservoirs, or also round table for participation in the river basin planning. You can see in this complex flow chart that you can see that the river basin management plan is the third one, is developed in parallel to the strategic environment assessment. These processes are connected very often and developed simultaneously in different years. During 3 years is for each plan, and it's a really complex process that need to create a lot of bodies for discussion, for the active participation. I will pass quickly because it's not the main question I would like to deal with. There are commissions for involving the NGOs, administration, business associations, and also, of course, the users. Okay, let me pass this, and then a key is have a very clear and transparent information, because the participation is not real, and some of the claims came from incomplete information or late information, because the participation need to be implemented since the early stages in order to be really useful. Okay, let me pass quickly and go directly to the first case. The first case is the desalination program in the Spanish Mediterranean basin. You know that in 2004 we had a national master plan for water management that included a very big transfer of water from the Ebro River in the north to the south, parallel to the Mediterranean coast, and in 2004 was stopped and changed by another strategy based on integrated resource management, including all kind of measures in order to have a more modern way to face the problem without this transfer that create large conflicts between regions. This new master plan include as a chapter, the desalination with about more than 20 desalination plants along the shore of the Mediterranean basin in Spain. If we look to the competences, we found that the desalination program is part of a national plan, and then is competence of the central government. But if we recover the distribution of competences, we can see that sorry, because I don't understand the Bosnian slide. Okay, the central government retains the competences in environmental impact statements and strategic environmental assessment. Once we have the approval of the national master plan from the environmental point of view, we also need to manage each project one by one. And the central government has the power to change the source of the water resource. For example, for overexploited aquifers, that in most of the cases for drinking water supply, and then can decide to replace this source of water by another one as desalinated water. But you remember that the responsible for the drinking water supply is the municipality, even that the money is in the autonomous government. And then this is a very complex way to solve this problem. The state had to negotiate with each municipality some kind of agreement or contract for buying the water, but and the municipality has the responsibility to have the warranty for providing water to the people, etc. And then so, but also the regional government retain the competence in the authorization for operating these desalination plants, and also for monitoring the environmental impacts even in the marine area. So the plan was launched, but the conflicts still continue because the central government can decide and can dictate also the environmental assessment of each project and the strategic environment assessment. But the regional government has the power to deny the operation, or to give the permission for the operation. And where we were in a very hard conflict between both levels of administration. Finally, we need to go to the Constitutional Court to have a final decision, and finally the central government decision were validated by the Constitutional Court, and the desalination plant were built and now are most of them in operation. But the conflict of competences is not really solved yet, because the distribution of environmental decisions are complex because the distribution, the political structure of the country. The second case is even more complex because it's related to the Albufeira Lake. Albufereira Lake is the result of a ancient bay. In Roman areas, this was a bay, was seawater here, and and after centuries is close, isolated from the sea, and is a freshwater lake and natural park around. But the city, the metropolitan area of Valencia, grew up a lot around this area and create environmental pressures on the lake. In fact, the quality of the water in the lake became very bad and is a hypertrophic lake in this moment. And then before the conception of the strategic environmental assessment directive, we start some studies in order to create a specific plan for recovering the quality of the lake from the environmental point of view and quality of the water, etc. And this we try to involve as much as possible the independent experts by means of panels or discussion. And since the beginning, we try to do our best from the participation of the best experts, local, representing different institutions or independents. This process were giving a feedback for the officers, and finally to make a plan that the objective was to recover the quality of the lake and reduce the quantity of nutrients in the lake, and we make a lot of participation in this process. And finally was defined a plan. I'm sorry, I forgot to translate this in Spanish, but let me give you a broad idea about this plan. This plan was has in red. We identify the most urgent actions to take in order to recover as quick as possible the quality of the lake, and that means to avoid the entrance of dirty waters from urban rain waters or wastewaters, export them out the natural part. Also the improvements of the wastewater treatment plants, and also a better feed of fresh water from rivers in order to improve quickly the quality of the water into the area. There are a lot of other measures for silting, for retaining solids in the basin, the watershed incoming in the lake also. But we established some phases. The first one was this action plan to reduce drastically, but not enough, the parameters as phosphorus or chlorophyll. And then in the river basin managed plans following, to go slowly to recover until 2027 is the next horizon to finally recover the quality. This was the idea. You know that there are some improvements, not so much but we are in the way. But what is the problem? This is a program, and this program need to be supported by a strategic environment plan. But all these projects are part of the national master plan, and the national master plan has a strategic environmental assessment. And theoretically, everything is okay, but the complexity of the institutional structure of this area is close to the city, and a lot of users and people interested create a problem that are still on the table. It's very difficult to have a consensus about all the strategy, all the projects, all the decision to be made. And then let's see a quick look to the list of stakeholders that are has competences or interest in this park. Yes, of course, the municipality of Valencia, the city is the owner of the lake, but also there are an institution that is the technical office, the BiH Albufereira, who has the responsibility for management of the lake. Also, the Júcar River Basin Organization is from the central state, has the competencies in water resources. Also affecting to the coast, the coastal directorate, the regional council housing and land management, of course the natural park itself has competences. Also the Junta de Desagüe, that means an organization of irrigators that has the power to decide how much water they need to take from the lake, etc. Other users are fishers, are hunting, tourists, etc. Also, the Junta Rectora means the governance of the natural park with the participation of the stakeholders. Also, of course, municipality, etc. A lot. And finally, the civil society. There are many conflicts between all of them, of this, and continue discussions between so many stakeholders involved in this question. And then finally, was part of the projects were implemented, but they are still, after many years in discussion, if the wetland need to take the water from the lake or from the wastewater treatment plant, etc., etc., and the conflict is permanent. So at the end, the civil society create a symposium in 2016, but this is a spontaneous action from the civil society without where the officials are invited to participate, but the initiative is from the people themselves. And then this initiative is the result of the lack of understanding between all the, and finally was the civil society who has to provide a consensus. And we release a report with all the suggestions for managing this complex situation. Finally, I would like to make some reflections about and in this process. Sorry, I forgot to say that this report contains almost 300 propositions or proposals from the people, from the participating, from the experts, from all the stakeholders, and was concentrated in about 100 propositions for the different administrations to take into account. I would like finally to show this plot is from the International Commission on Large Dams, where is an interesting suggestion that reflect perfectly this problem. Normally we have a planning process where there is a participation, a high level, a national level or basin level, and finally a decision making, including the SEA and the approval of the plans or programs. But then you have to put in place the projects. And where you are trying to participate in the project, you found that there are another issues, another actors, another stakeholders implied, and then found different problems, different point of view that was held in the planning process. And then in this step used to be stopped the implementation of actions. And then this is a problem of destruction. One alternative that is proposed in this bulletin of the International Commission on Large Dams is to start in parallel and then identify in the process of participation of small actions that are also important to the studies for having good feedback when you are approving a plan. And then the decision making for to approve a plan with the SEA and the plan itself need to identify low level also the issues and promote the participation and for hypothetical projects, individual, but that need to feed the process for planning also. This is an alternative that is convenient to think about. And finally, I would like to give you my lesson learned about the implication of the people in the process, because you know that there is not enough to inform the society, but promote the participation as much as possible in the early stages, and finally reach some win-win solutions. And then my last slide is to share with you my own lesson learned about the first is the lack of implication of benefited people. Normally the affected people is present, but the benefited people usually trust in the administration and is less implicated. The second is the people who want to lead the process has to gain the credibility and has to be in a very balanced position as a referee. The transparency is a key for, and we need to know the red lines and be clear which things we can discuss and which one are already decided. If not, the participating people can get frustrated. The capacity building is also a key, because you cannot try to take advantage of the ignorance of the partners. Also, realize that the information does not belong to the agency, but to the citizens. The information must be very clear and transparent and available for everybody. Of course, there also will be some people against anything. This is normal, but also to remember that both representative democracy and participatory democracy need to be combined. And finally, the strategic environmental assessment does not imply that everything is all solved. Then when you are promoting the parts of the plan, the problems will be also on the table, and it's not the panacea for solving everything. And that was my reflection, and finish with these ideas my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hvala gospodinu Enriqueu.
Thank you, Mr. Enrique. It was a great pleasure hearing these experiences from Spain in the process of implementation of the strategic impact assessment, especially for the reason that Spain has quite complex administrative structure. I would like now to remind all the participants that they can ask questions to our panelists using the questions and answers option, Q&A option. So at a later time during the discussions, our panelists will be able to answer any questions that you may have. According to the plan, we will make a short break, some 10 minutes. So I suggest we come back at 10:15 to continue the work. For those who were not able to see our promotional video that was prepared under this project that concerns the environmental impact assessment. Will have the opportunity to see it now during the break. So see you back at 10:15.
Vlade širom svijeta za kreiranje budućnosti koriste razvojne strategije društava, gradova i regija. Odluke koje donose utječu na kvalitet našeg života i zato su veoma važne. Bosna i Hercegovina priprema strategiju i akcioni plan okoliša koji se skraćeno nazivaju ESAP BiH 2030+. Ovaj dokument će odrediti ciljeve zaštite okoliša te najvažnije aktivnosti u Bosni i Hercegovini do 2032. godine. Dokument će sadržavati 4 strategije i akciona plana za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, Federaciju Bosne i Hercegovine, Republiku Srpsku i Brčko distrikt. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš SPUO biće provedena kako bi se već u ranoj fazi priprema u obzir uzeli sve relevantni okolišni, društveno-ekonomski i problemi održivosti. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš će ukazati na sve značajne efekte na okoliš i društveno-ekonomske aspekte koji proizilaze iz ESAP-a. Ponudit će alternativna rješenja i mjere za ublažavanje negativnih utjecaja. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš se provodi paralelno sa izradom ESAP-a u skladu sa direktivom o SPUO EU. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš biće provedena na sva 4 nivoa vlasti u skladu sa važećim propisima. Bitan element strateške procjene je da omogući uvezanost i analizu stavova različitih interesnih grupa. Zbog toga će završni izvještaj o SPUO kao i nacrt ESAP-a biti prezentirani javno, što će omogućiti svakom pojedincu da da koristan doprinos i iznese svoje mišljenje. Zajedno gradimo bolju budućnost, štiteći okoliš. Vlade širom svijeta za kreiranje budućnosti koriste razvojne strategije društava, gradova i regija. Odluke koje donose utječu na kvalitet našeg života i zato su veoma važne. Bosna i Hercegovina priprema strategiju i akcioni plan okoliša koji se skraćeno nazivaju ESAP BiH 2030+. Ovaj dokument će odrediti ciljeve zaštite okoliša te najvažnije aktivnosti u Bosni i Hercegovini do 2032. godine. Dokument će sadržavati 4 strategije i akciona plana za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, Federaciju Bosne i Hercegovine, Republiku Srpsku i Brčko distrikt. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš SPUO biće provedena kako bi se već u ranoj fazi priprema u obzir uzeli sve relevantni okolišni, društveno-ekonomski i problemi održivosti. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš će ukazati na sve značajne efekte na okoliš i društveno-ekonomske aspekte koji proizilaze iz ESAP-a. Ponudit će alternativna rješenja i mjere za ublažavanje negativnih utjecaja. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš se provodi paralelno sa izradom ESAP-a u skladu sa direktivom o SPUO EU. Strateška procjena utjecaja na okoliš biće provedena na sva 4 nivoa vlasti u skladu sa važećim propisima. Bitan element strateške procjene je da omogući uvezanost i analizu stavova različitih interesnih grupa. Zbog toga će završni izvještaj o SPUO kao i nacrt ESAP-a biti prezentirani javno, što će omogućiti svakom pojedincu da da koristan doprinos i iznese svoje mišljenje. Zajedno gradimo bolju budućnost, štiteći okoliš.
Pozdrav svima. Evo nas ponovo nakon...
Okay, we are back after this break. We will continue with our agenda. You had another opportunity to see this video on strategic impact assessment in the project of development of the strategy and action plan for environment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The next presentation is about the role of NGO sector in implementation of the environmental strategic impact assessment based on the experience of Adria by George Stefanovic. We will see about the experience of BiH Adria on environmental impact assessment in many countries of the Western Balkans. And through this presentation, we will see what's the role of WWF Adria in assessing the environmental impact. Mr. George Stefanovic has many years of experience in assessing the participation in development of the strategic impact assessment. Currently, he's with the WWF Adria that is involved in public participation in relevant assessments. He is focused on strategic impact assessment and strategic impact on the environment. Mr. Stefanovic, the floor is yours. Good day from me too. It is a great pleasure for me to say a few words. I will share the screen so you will be able to see the presentation too. I hope you can see the presentation. Not yet. Can you see it now, Senka? No, not yet. I can see the presentation on my screen, and I'm really sorry that we are having these problems. Snezana, do you see it? Or Maya? No, no, sorry. Okay, then we will share the presentation from our side if you agree. It may be a problem with the connection. Okay, we can see it now. I apologize. I work with the WWF Adria, which is the regional NGO involved in protection of nature. And one of our basic standards is the involvement of all the stakeholders in decision making. For this opportunity, I prepared a short overview of what the CSOs in Bosnia and Herzegovina look like. And in what ways do we participate in the processes of environment protection? And how do we see the participation in preparation and adoption of the plans in various areas, and particularly how we see our role in the strategic impact assessment related processes. The most interesting part of this presentation will be some examples that I prepared from the region, and especially the example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in the end, I will say a couple of words on how the NGOs, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, encourage the work of not only NGOs, but are also trying to share their good energy and good experiences with other partners in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are many NGOs or CSOs, civil society organizations. However, the only common thing amongst them is that they are very much different in various ways, looking at different aspects. First of all, the number of members, the quality, the knowledge of the employees, various focuses of interest. There are organizations that are involved in many issues related to environment protection, but there are also some that are focused on specific segments of biodiversity. And they have different levels of financial and staff and other potentials. And although there are over 300 registered organizations, in my view, only 15, maybe 20 organizations are active in the whole country and have been active continuously, and their work has been recognized, and they have open communication both within the NGO sector, and they have the communication with the public bodies, the scientific institutions, the economy, and other stakeholders. One good thing is that most NGOs working on the matters of environment protection are linked or through an email platform, which is called Eco Network. It is actually a list of email addresses that we use to share information, help each other, talk about problems, and offer solutions for our joint work in case that we have the possibility and capacity to deal with that common problem. In addition to this Eco Network, which is a general platform for all NGOs, individuals, and institutions working in environment protection, there are coalitions in specific sectors. The most important, the most active is the Coalition for Protection of Rivers, which is focused to a fewer organizations that are focused exclusively on protection of rivers of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is more a theoretical setup, but it's based in reality. How can the CSOs get involved in the processes of resolving specific problems? And there are several levels and several ways how the NGOs can participate in these processes. Starting with the simplest one, the lowest level, that they receive information from, let's say, the active parties in specific procedures. The higher level are consultations upon invitation. This is actually the most common case when the NGOs get involved, and that is the typical situation when the competent authority publishes on their website a certain draft document, a piece of legislation, a study, or a report, and then NGOs typically write with reference to that draft and communicate with the competent agency, competent authority, to improve the given document. The higher level of involvement is the involvement of NGOs and representatives of NGOs in the preparation of the document at an earlier stage. So the NGOs are given the opportunity to participate in drafting the document. And that is the case with these strategies that we hear a lot of discussion about, and representatives of NGOs are involved directly in the working group, so they can participate already in the process of drafting the document and thus influence the design of the document. The next stage would be participation in the work of the decision-making bodies. There are some examples, although very few, that NGOs are invited to participate in the fora that are making decisions. And the model or method of participation, which is not seen here, and that is that NGOs have the equal standing as equal partners who are participating in making the decisions, and they are part of the forum that makes the decision as an equal partner. If we go back to the discussion of strategic impact assessment, I see it, the strategic impact assessment, as a mechanism that allows the organizations interested in the environmental issues to participate in the planning process, so that the planning process opens at least two opportunities to the NGOs to participate in the process. The first one is by participating in the design of the plan itself, and the second is their additional engagement in the issues related to strategic impact assessment, so they can have the opportunity to talk about their specific interests in terms of the environmental influences through this strategic impact assessment. What is very important for us is that we are involved not only with documents that are a direct output of the bodies or public bodies that are related to environmental protection, but also some other authorities that are responsible for administration, spatial planning, energy, waters, etc., because all those are areas where we can see a very strong impact on environment. So NGOs have a strong interest to participate in these processes. The laws, environmental laws, now finally seem to include some good provisions on how to do the strategic impact assessment, who is competent, and how the NGOs can be involved in the process. Republika Srpska, by adopting the law in 2012, provided a good legal platform, and after that the relevant authorities passed the necessary bylaws. In the Federation, the new law, which is in force as of the beginning of this year, provided a good legal basis, and now the required bylaws related to strategic impact assessment need to be passed. But now I can say we have quite decent, if nothing, the legal basis for participation of NGOs in the strategic impact assessment processes. All of this is relatively new for us. So there is quite a lot of wandering around, especially at the local levels of authorities, LAUs, and there is still quite a lot of room to get to some better processes related to impact assessment. This is just the list of phases where the NGO sector wants and can participate. First, there are the preparatory activities that are very important because it is in those stages a decision is made whether the strategic impact assessment would be made with reference to a specific plan. The open issue is the choice of those who will write the report or this technical material that is used as a basis for strategic impact assessment, because there is the opinion of NGOs that the reports are not at the of the best quality. And another important thing is that it is very clearly defined in what ways the bodies or organizations can participate and how the participation can be achieved.
U fazi pripreme izvještaja o strateškoj
In
procjeni,
the phase of the preparation of the reports, SEA report, in the consultation phase, there are certain points that require attention. And one of these points is in which way the consultation process should be organized. We've seen that it is desirable to have consultations in the phase of the preparation of the document. And I'm free to invite consultants who are preparing these reports that they approach NGOs in the early stage of the preparation of this report. If nothing, NGOs very often have available quality data on the environmental data, which can be used in the preparation of these reports. What we expect and what we actually would insist on is that the organization of the participation of public should also be covered by a report, and that this report should accompany the SEA report in all cases. And finally, we have the evaluation of SEA report. The ministry adopts its decision, an opinion, or issues an opinion on the report. And to this end, it would be necessary to at least explain in which way the representatives of the non-governmental sector, public, and other institutions were involved in the consultation process, and whether and in which way there and what kind of communication was conducted with representatives of other countries which are likely to be affected by certain plan or program. Given the complexity of the structure of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it would be desirable to know about the communication with the other entity and or Bačko district in certain cases. The participation in SEA processes, it is very important to show the method of participation. Now we are coming back to the basics of the strategic impact assessment, and these would be alternative solutions and how they were considered and how the environmental issues were integrated in the relevant plan or program. And it is very important to have clearly justified and explained conclusions reached during the preparation of the SEA report, which should be. It is important to describe these arrangements and the participation process and all options in a language which will be understandable for the general public. Regarding CSOs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we indeed have a huge interest in participating in development of plans and programs, especially in examination of their impact on the environment. We have a number of documents which are in force and which are applied. However, they did not involve the development of strategic impact assessment report. These are the documents which had been adopted before the adoption of the law which regulates the strategic impact assessment. And another fact which should be addressed is the fact that even if strategic impact assessment is conducted, it is not taken into account as a basis for certain project. And that's another point which we need to consider, and we should see how we can include the strategic impact assessment report as a basis for development of certain projects, and how we can integrate the opinions of the non-governmental sector, public, and other stakeholders in the process. What I have already said is that we did not have any possibility to influence. I'm sorry, we have lost Mr. Who is preparing the studies, and we believe that the reports have not been of highest quality. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the non-governmental, when I say we, I mean non-governmental organizations, typically we provide either individual or common opinions or inputs on certain documents through the ECO network, for instance. What is another important point, and we are not happy about this, very frequently the strategic assessment is conducted separately from the development or implementation of a project or a plan. The time is running, and I will just refer to a couple of examples from the region, the countries we know well. I looked at several strategic impact assessment reports from Croatia and Serbia. In Serbia, they entitled, under the title screening, they mainly state that public consultation were conducted, but there is no detailed information as to how public consultations were conducted. In Croatia, their reports are more detailed, but they are mainly narrowed down to the list of organizations which participated in the consultations. However, they do not provide the contents of consultations, and they don't explain why certain inputs and proposals were not accepted. I selected one regional plan within the scope of the international agreement for the basin of the Sava River. While they were developing the management plan, they also drew up a special document which actually explained in which way the non-governmental organizations participated in the process. You can find this document on the website of the Sava River Commission in both English and local languages. So if you have any interest to look at it, that's where you can find it. Obviously, they achieved a very high level of the integration and participation of NGOs. They organized some workshops with the participation of 120 participants, attendees. And I would, you can see here how many comments were received, 119, it says here. And then you can also find the structure of stakeholders who provided comments by countries and by the source. You have comments from non-governmental organizations, official institutions. In this report stated also how many comments were accepted, how many comments were not accepted. And I think this is a very good format and very good example how the participation of public could be covered. Given that my time expired, I will show another example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I use it because it is a good example of do's and don'ts from the point of view of the non-governmental organizations. I hope you can see this document. A major error was made, and my organization made this error, so I'm very free to present it. This is the draft report, SEA report for Klekovača. On the last page of this document, Mr. George, I apologize for interruption. We cannot see the document. If you want to show it, please. We see the presentation still. Never mind, because we are running out of time.
Dakle, o čemu se radi?
Well, the point is, it's quite difficult to change the screen now.
Ne znam da li sad vidite ovaj dokument.
Can you see the document now? Yes, we can. I apologize for this technical glitch. In the contents of the draft study, it is a huge document. On the last page, my colleague acted hastily and provided a positive opinion to the entire report. I see this as a very bad practice. As you can see, this is a positive opinion of the WWF, that the document was developed in accordance with the rules of the profession. We believe that this should not be done in any way. Regarding the same case, Klekovača case, another very well-drafted document was prepared. It was prepared by our colleagues from the Environmental Center. They waited for the spatial plan and strategic environmental assessment to be published, and then they provided their comments, what they think about the plan and in which way this report could be used. I provided both positive and negative example intentionally, because as non-governmental organization, in response to the move of our colleague, we discussed this within our organization, and ultimately our colleague accepted that he made an error, and he punished himself by leaving the organization because he thought he had made an error which is in contravention with the standards of the work of NGOs, that his action was inappropriate because we don't have the power to assess the report as such, to assess the preparation of the report and to approve it or not to approve it. Our role is to try to provide inputs to improve the document. My point is actually that the participation of the non-governmental sector is not only an opportunity, not only a privilege, it requires a high level of responsibility on the part of the non-governmental organizations.
Opet kažem, vrlo često u Bosni i Hercegovini preko sredstava elektronske komunikacije.
Very often in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we try to make common actions when we comment on these expert documents among the NGOs, and we also seek to approach the drafter or the consultant who is preparing the reports to communicate directly with them, because we always seek to contribute to the report and to have the best possible reports as the ultimate result. And finally, one more point. Very often, we have multiple projects which are related to the strategic impact assessment. In recent past, we had a project COSEED. In the preparation of these projects, some tools were developed and some manuals with guidance about the participation in the SEA process. Together with the responsible line ministry in the Republika Srpska, we organized a number of workshops for civil servants, employees in public institutions at the entity and lower levels, to teach them how they should participate in the strategic impact assessments. As a conclusion, we are open for cooperation with any stakeholder or all stakeholders in the strategic impact assessment. Once again, I would like to thank you, and I would like to credit the example of the preparation of ESAP and the method they adopted with working groups. That would be all from my side. I apologize, I spoke longer than expected, but this is a rather interesting topic. Thank you very much for the attention. I reiterate, together we can do much better, and I'm open for all your questions and suggestions. Thank you, Mr. George. As far as I can see, there are certain questions for you, but we will wait until the time when we have the panel discussion, and we will give you an opportunity to answer these questions. Thank you very much for this summary of the application of the strategic impact assessment in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region. Now we will move on with our agenda. The next presentation will be provided by Mr. Vedat Sulic and João Pedro Silva. Together, the presentation will provide an insight into the current status of the strategic impact assessment, which is conducted for the purpose of the development of environmental strategy of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The presentation will provide the information on the work done and on further steps and challenges which the consultants or owners of the strategic impact assessment face. Mr. Vedat and João, you have the floor just to check if you hear us and see the presentation.
Thank you very much. It is really a true pleasure to hear experiences from other countries. It's comforting to see that we are not the only ones who are complicated, especially when it comes to these processes. Our task in this presentation, the consultant who is working with us, and I would dare say a friend, is working on the strategic impact assessment through the ESAP. And in this presentation, we will introduce the approach we adopted when developing this document, which is actually quite challenging because we are working in parallel for the three levels for Bosnia, for Federation, Republika Srpska, and Brčko level, and then the aggregated part for the whole of the country. This is not a specific sectorial document. We have different components here included. You are all fully aware of this. Mr. Silva is also advisor to the European Commission when it comes to the SE directive and the SE process. This is likely the very first exercise in the world that SEA is done as such a comprehensive document. In the first part, I will present the general approach to drafting the document, the whole process, and then Mr. Silva will say a few words about different elements that are related to the indicators, the influences, etc. So I will share a screen for a while and then Mr. Silva will continue. To start with, the theme is I will introduce the team. It's a theory for protection from Republika Srpska. It includes the project coordinator, myself, and the international advisors. We have the teams for each unit, the Republika Srpska Federation and Brčko district, and for each sector that overlaps with the ESAP topics. We have one designated expert, and that means that we have some 30 positions occupied by 22 individuals. So this is a large team that is working on this, and we are engaged in regular communication at the project level with the implementation team that works on the ESAP. This is the first time that I saw this promotional clip. It was very good. I find it very good. I wasn't aware how well the video summarizes the left part of my presentation, so I won't spend too much time on it. I just wanted to mention some of the most important things about the purpose of the strategic impact assessment. It is done in its early stages. On the right side, I offered what we typically do in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that is that often, unfortunately, the strategic impact assessment is not done at all. And those of us who are working in the sector, on this list of participants, there are many people I know, and they understand these issues very well. So we can all testify that often this is not even done. And we see quite a lot of documents adopted, like the framework energy sector development strategy for the entity level, the state level, and before that, the transport strategies. So we have quite a number of strategic important documents for which the impact assessment has not been done. And even if they are done, they are done in the following way. The planning or program document is brought to the level of being 99% completed, and then the strategic impact assessment is seen as a correctional mechanism that is supposed to improve the quality of the document, and it's often done only pro forma, formally, instead of being fully integrated in the document and in the aspects that concern environment, society, and economy. Republika Srpska, the entity, is at a higher level of implementation than the Federation when it comes to the number of strategic impact assessment, a lot more than in the Federation. There were some questions as to how many. Well, it's a question for the ministry, and I would also like to know that. The truth is, most of these strategic assessments are done for the spatial plans or urban development plans for these spatial planning documents, but for the strategic level and strategic documents, it is not often the case. Another thing that we often see when it comes to involvement or lack thereof of the general public is that they use a process that is just sharing the document on the website. To public consultations, very few participants come, and often only when they start implementation of the plan or program, the general public wants to do something. Often their arguments are well justified, but not properly submitted. Therefore, the general public, mostly civil society organizations, should be involved at a very early stage. The Strategic Impact Assessment Directive foresees this, and we specified it further to have the general public involved, and we decided to do that because ESAP process is a very participatory process, and it involves participation of many stakeholders, not only NGOs, but private sector and others, and we decided to follow the same logics. And in this early stage, and to communicate with the NGO sector in this early stage. Where we are at the moment and what is our plan for implementation of the document is shown in this slide. The process is in developmental context, it's divided in 3 stages. The implementation process is seen as the separate phase, the screening phase. That means the identification of the needs that involved achieving consensus with the ministry and say as the implementing agency of the whole process. What we did for the level of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Brčko district are the scoping reports that are expected to define what this cell would do, what would be the problems they would deal with, what data they would use, what indicators they would use for benchmarking. The thing that I need to emphasize is that ESAP in itself is eco-friendly. So the results and objectives are in their core eco-friendly, and they improve the status of environment, as opposed to having strategies like for energy and the transport sector, where there are many measures that may impact environment in an adverse way. And in this context, is also specific. After we identify the scope, well, the consultations have been completed in accordance with the law, with the institutions and bodies at the entity level. NGOs were also consulted, and all their comments were incorporated in the final version. In Republika Srpska, this stage was defined differently. The scope has been defined by law. However, since in the discussions with the competent institutions and say we agreed to produce a document that would, by structure and methodology, almost identical to the scoping report, but we call it a focusing report. And it has the same scope and coverage as the corresponding reports for the Federation and Brčko district. So this process started in March, the consultations and adoption of the comments and it lasted by the end of July. And then we got the final response on adoption of these reports at all levels. In parallel, we also started with drafting the CA report with all the elements where it was possible. And this applies to the current, and this concerns the current status of environment. We became more active once we had defined the scope of the SCA, and we produced the draft SCA report. As consultants, we have to keep it rather fluid because ESAP, through its many iterations, it has been changed. And this has direct reflections on our work on the SCI document. And in connection with this, we opted for an approach that allows this fluidity to integrate any change made to the ESAP, while at the same time complying with the time horizon for the whole process of both the ESAP and our job. So before we move on to this part, this is the overview of the project outputs. At the level of the entities, we'll have 3 documents, 3 strategic impact assessments. At the level of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the consensus is to produce an aggregated report, which means that all the 3 documents would be combined. And there are initiatives to produce a similar document that will have a separate form for BiH level. It would be an additional document, but this is not officially decided yet. So what we've done so far, in addition to many meetings at the project level with the SCA team and individual ESAP experts, we had ad hoc meetings with many of them. The focus report and scoping report has been adopted, as I said, and we are doing analysis of scenarios and impact analysis, and that's something Mr. Zhao will speak more about. The initial deadline for finalizing all 3 documents is December this year, which is quite optimistic scenario. In those coming days and weeks, in the first half of October, we plan to submit the draft strategic impact assessment report, environmental strategic impact assessment. It would be submitted to the competent institutions and all other stakeholders involved in the process, and we will have the discussions as foreseen in the law, the consultations with NGO sectors and various other stakeholders in a public way, and after that we intend to incorporate the accepted comments in the final version of the report. The ESAP process is not in the final stage. There are still working group meetings to be done, and it is possible that the objectives and measures under the objectives might change or deleted or new, possibly added. So the process, as I said, of our work has to be fluid. That would be in brief about the approach to development of the common impact assessment. And now I give the floor to João to speak about his part. And now I will stop sharing the screen, and João, you can continue.
Sorry that I keep there because it's easy for me. There was
Yes,
thank you for that. Okay. Thank you for this invitation. I will follow Vedat's presentation. I'm really thankful for this invitation to this workshop to show the status of the current implementation of the ESAP, and I'm going to focus on the process, where we are, the challenges, the objectives. The first is that we set up generic objectives in terms of the SEA implementation. SEA is a process, is not just a document, and the idea of SEA is to achieve sustainability. And this sustainability, of course, is at state level, but as well there's up at the different entity levels. And this we set up for the objective of sustainability, and against that objectives of sustainability, we'll assess the different ESAPs. As well, SEA has objective to enable a better decision making, to provide information, to provide feedback to, in this case, to the ESAP, to give them tools and information that will make the ESAP better, and as well to provide the authorities better decision making tools. Ultimately, is to comply with the legislation that is in place in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but as well with the foresight, with the objective, final objective, that Bosnia-Herzegovina acquires all the EU environmental legislation, the EU environmental act. These were the main blocks to develop our approach to the SEA process of the ESAP. Next, thank you for that. For that, we establish different SEA objectives by team. These teams are the likely environmental areas that could be affected by ESAP, and these are well defined by the SEA directive. We follow the SEA directive and as well the state legislation and entity level legislation. So we check all the thematic areas from biodiversity, climate change, human health, socioeconomic, and we establish sectorial objectives for SEA. And these objectives are based on sustainability objectives. So specific objectives for SEA teams that then will be used and are being used actually to assess the ESAP. And we develop these, what we call the SEA assessment questions, are the questions we are going to ask the ESAP based on these three main blocks of the generic SEA objectives. So specific evaluation assessment questions that we'll ask the ESAP, and then we'll check if ESAP replies or not to these questions. These questions are strategic, are in line with sustainability objectives, and they are by team. Of course, the teams, the environmental teams, do not correspond with ESAP teams, because ESAP teams, it's a policy-making document and is developing policy and legislation. And some of the areas are completely horizontal, for example, environmental management. So what we are assessing is the likely impacts on the environment from the ESAP. So we follow, for example, what's the impact on noise regarding human health, on air quality, on water. So, for example, the ESAP as thematic area and objectives in the area of waste, but of course, we are not going to evaluate waste per se as a team. What we are going to evaluate is the impact of the measures from ESAP in terms of waste on different aspects. in case of waste will be from biodiversity, climate, air, water, and so on and so on. So we have these questions, a setup of questions that in this presentation we just have two examples for climate change and biodiversity, and we are using these questions as a reference. These questions are not written in stone, they are open. We incorporated and changed some of these evaluations questions coming from the scoping consultation, and we incorporate them, and we are still adapting these questions, but we'll assess against these. Next, thank you. So in terms of interactions between the ESAP, for the three entities and the SEA, we have different interactions. So it's a moving process. It's both processes run in parallel, but the feedback from the SEA is not at last stage. So we are providing feedback at different stages, and then we have as well feedback from the ESAP, how our suggestions were incorporated, how our evaluation questions were incorporated or not, and then will be reflected in the SEA report. The SEA report is a sort of, now currently at stage we are, an open document where we incorporate all this feedback. Normally, and this is the common approach, the SEAs are done at the final, when the ESAP is already done, it's finalized. So we here have a fantastic opportunity to have a plan that is in elaboration at the same time with the SEA, and we provide that feedback to improve the plan. Normally, there is this idea that the SEA follows a very strict timeline, and normally it's done at the end when the plans are done. That was a couple of examples we've seen here today. So here, to avoid that, we are incorporating before the finalization of the SEA report and before going to consultation. So currently, we are at the elaboration of the SEA report. We are at that stage. And of course, we already included feedback from the consultations at scoping level. Next, yeah. So these are the teams we are assessing. These are the teams coming from the SEA directive. We cover them all. We are going to assess the ESAP according to the likely impacts of the ESAP on these teams. As you can see, waste is not there, for example, even though ESAP as a waste as a generic team. So we will evaluate waste, the impact of the waste measures and the waste objectives from the ESAP in these SEA thematic areas, and we'll make this correspondence. So how we are going to do it? So we'll currently, for the SEA report and the SEA analysis, we already finalized the analysis of the context, the current situation of the environment, the collection of indicators, the description of the main environmental problems, so on and so on. So we compile that for all the SEA teams. We have that information, and we are going to use this information, the baseline information, to set up different scenarios. In this case, will be scenarios, implementation scenarios of the ESAP, and as well, we'll evaluate the measures from the ESAP. We'll identify these impacts, and we'll have feedback to the ESAP, and then it's up to the ESAP to incorporate or not, or improve the specific measures that we evaluate and that we flag that had issues. Then we evaluate that significance of impacts at the end, when we have finalized this feedback process between the SEA and the ESAP, and we'll propose new alternatives in measures. And then that's the final stage before going to consultation. And that's the final stage opportunity for ESAP to include these proposals in terms of mitigation. If they are not, they will be there proposed as mitigation in case there is a need. Next, thank you. In terms of collecting information to set up the context and baseline information. We did this, the description of the current political status, the environmental status, so on. We had big challenges to connect information for all environmental aspects in Bosnia-Herzegovina and for the three entities. The majority of the information indicators are not available. There is no trends. So we rely a lot on the expert judgment. Sorry, the next one. So the next slide, I think. So we rely and we compile information from different sources. We check them and against the ESAP measures and objectives. So there is a correlation between the information we collect and what's in the ESAP. So we set up a list of core indicators that we'll use. The majority of the indicators are not quantitative, are just qualitative. We have some information and we'll work with those. That's the information we have. We are aware that there are issues, but we have to do the assessment. So these assessments will be based on qualitative indicators, qualitative information, and we have to assume that, and we have to live with that information, but we'll do the assessment anyway. Next one, so I'll give an example. So this is an example of a relation between the indicator, in this case for biodiversity, in the total percentage of protected areas in this case is for an example for Federation Bosnia-Herzegovina, where there is a reference that is, in this case, it's one of the few cases we have a quantitative information, so we know how much is protected in Federation Bosnia-Herzegovina, and there are operational objectives from the ESAP that might improve these baseline information. So we building this correlation and we're using these operational objectives from the ESAP and baselining information to build up our assessment. So how we are going to do the assessment? The assessment, and that's a common pitfall for in SEAs, they tend to build up the assessment in very similar to environmental impact assessment, and they forget that the word itself that it's key in this process. It's a strategic. It's called strategic environmental assessment. It's not a simple environmental impact assessment. So we have to give strategic information, evaluate the likely impacts of on this case, on the ESAP, against the ESAP environmental objectives and against the SEA objectives, SEA sustainability objectives. So we have to give strategic information for decision making and to improve the plan. So this is the approach we have. We are giving this strategic information, we flag the issues regarding the likely impacts on the environment, and we expect that the ESAP improves or adds or changes measures and objectives to overcome this approach. So we give that strategic information. Normally, environmental impact assessment, we just measure the impact, we evaluate the impact, and we propose mitigation measures. Here, no, it's the idea is not to, it's to provide feedback before and to provide that information. As well, if there is no way, if the ESAP doesn't foresee any change from our recommendations in the previous stage, we then propose mitigation or then alternatives that could be or not included. And as well, a monitoring program to monitor the progress. Of course, the monitoring of the program is the environmental program. A common issue here is that we are doing a strategic environmental assessment and environmental evaluation. And we point out strategic sustainability objectives from the SEA. We are not drafting the ESAP. So we provide information for decision makings to improve and the elaboration of the ESAP. Another common mistake, and we've seen these, and we are not doing that, is the evaluation of the ESAP per se. The evaluation, the impact evaluation, not the environmental evaluation, that is, it's our role, but the impact, what's going to be an impact, the financial impact, what's the impact of the measures. And then when we go to public discussion, there is a common mixing up of the plan and the SEA, and the comments we receive, and we already had that experience from the scoping report consultation, is that we receive comments regarding the implementation of the ESAP, comments regarding the plan itself, not the SEA. So, and quite common, this is mixed up. So we'll provide this information. So in the next steps, for avoiding this mixing up of the SEA with ESAP in terms of consultation. As well, in terms of implementation, we have to evaluate the ESAP objectives according to different implementation scenarios. So we are going to build scenarios, and we have 3 scenarios that we are going to evaluate. The scenario of the full implementation of the ESAP, where all the measures are implemented. A scenario where there is a reduced implementation or halfway through implementation of the ESAP. I would say probably it might be the more realistic scenario, and then a scenario where there is no ESAP. So we have these 0, what normally we call the 0 alternative, 0 implementation, no ESAP. So we can compare and see, okay, if there was no ESAP, the trend of the environment will be this one, this one, and this one. So we can compare with scenario 1 and scenario 2. So we like that. We have a reference to compare, and what's the difference for scenario 2 and scenario 1. The description of the scenarios will be, we are currently on that step, the implementation scenarios by different ESAP teams. So then we can evaluate, for example, for biodiversity, the biodiversity objectives on the ESAP. In this scenario implementation, what will be the impact regarding to the SEA objectives. So we'll cross that information, and we have this information. So this information will provide the decision maker to the authorities and who's drafting the ESAP information regarding what are the realistic options and what are not the realistic options in terms of measures and objectives. The next steps will be the consultation. The consultation, normally it's done before the final SEA report. So we provide the SEA report, and this SEA report is not the final one, because the final SEA report will include how the consultation, how the feedback from SEA into the ESAP was incorporated. So the consultation with authorities in the general public will be the next steps. As well, we'll assess if there are transboundary likely effects. At the scoping report, we provided the consultation. We already provided a list of the likely transboundary effects on the environment. We select them according at state level and entity level and inter-entity level. So we're going to assess all those between states and entities. That was at the scoping, and it was approved by the authorities. So we'll perform that assessment. Some there might not be, others will be impact, but those then, if there are, they will be subject to transboundary consultation as well. And then as well, the final, then we present the final say report with the consultation results, and as well, and that's really important, not only an annex to compiling all the public consultation, but how the SEIA recommendations, the SEIA feedback was or not incorporated back into the ESAP and that process. So the final say report tells a story on how the process went. And at a large stage with a say report, the environmental monitoring program and the plan implementation of the ESAP. And these are our next steps. So thank you. And we are open to questions, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vedad and Mr. Joao, for this detailed presentation of SEA process for development of ESAP. With this, we came to the end of today's presentations. My colleague Snezhana noted down the questions asked by the participants. I believe we did receive answers to certain questions, but perhaps Snezhana can take over and ask the questions that were not answered. Thank you. Thank you, Maya. I will sum up briefly. This is an opportunity for me to thank the panelists. We were not keeping with timelines with the presentations. The process was not as interactive as desirable. As for the examples, I should say that we received very interesting cases from Spain and Montenegro, but I believe our participants were most eager to hear what is going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the greatest number of questions pertain to the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In total, we have 8 questions that were answered, and we received a comment from Kaya. So 10 questions which were answered. The fact is that the majority of questions were answered in writing. However, perhaps it's useful to look at the questions briefly, and perhaps our panelists can add a few comments if they feel they should do so. So if you agree, I will read the questions. The first question, according to the number of likes, is whether we will have soon a training on SEA process. That was asked from Georgia Stefanovic, and Georgia answered that this will not happen soon. It will not be organized by WWF Adria, but he also started the initiative to launch a number of trainings on this topic and to prepare some manuals on the participation in the SEA processes. Professor Sandra Mijic-Kurtagic also intervened. And Georgia answered this first question. I hope he can provide us with the link of or some materials that we can make available to the participants. I will ask the local partner to make these manuals and documents available to our participants. Second question, Ms. Numic, do you believe that the non-functional PRTR database on annual emission of pollutants and ineffective methods for strategic assessment in a hamper efficient implementation? Chabarkapa answered, among other things, of course, the reasons you stated affect this process. I hope that Ms. Numic is happy with the answer. She referred to some major problems. It was stated that the federation law actually established the legal basis for SEA. Wasn't there any legal basis in the law from 2003 for SEA? And Georgia explained extensively that the previous law had provided certain legal basis, but it was not sufficiently detailed. So the new law from 2021 provides better legal basis, and we hope that we will have more studies on strategic impact assessment.
Urađen izvještaj o strateškoj procjeni, napomena da je uživo odgovoreno. Mislim da se gospodin Vedat Suljić u svojoj prezentaciji malo osvrnuo na ovo. Uglavnom, znači, radi se i prema onim informacijama koje smo mi u okviru ESAP-a sakupljali, uglavnom su to strateške procjene koje su urađene u Republici Srpskoj, uglavnom na prostorno plansku dokumentaciju, a ima i slučaj iz 2019. godine kada je studija za stratešku procjenu uticaja urađena na plan upravljanja otpadom u Republici Srpskoj. Međutim, opet više pitanja, znači, za evidencije vlasti, pa u ovom momentu ne možemo biti precizniji. Pitanje koliko NVO-i mogu uticati na usklađivanje zakona o zaštiti okoliša i životne sredine po horizontalnom i vertikalnom nivou. Obzirom da smo svjedoci svakodnevnog narušavanja okoliša, na koji način prikupljate informacije o javnim gradskim preduzećima, obzirom da su baze podataka dosta neuređene, barem što se tiče kantona Sarajevo. Đorđe, znači, odgovara da NVO-i komuniciraju sa nadležnim tijelima u toku pripreme i usvajanja zakona i drugih pravnih akata. NVO-i predlažu rješenja u formi komentara, dostavljaju tekst pojedinih članova akata ili čak cijeli akt. U toku usvajanja zakona o zaštiti okoliša Federacije BiH, NVO-i su održali niz sastanaka sa predstavnicima ministarstava, parlamentu, dostavljali pisane amandmane na tekst zakona, a slična je situacija i u RS. Narušavanja okoliša postoji, nelegalne radnje nisu obuzdane. Slažemo se, ali svi. Primjena i izvršenje zakona zaštita okoliša podrazumijeva rad institucija na svim nivoima NVO-a i svih drugih učesnika koji mogu imati interes u oblasti okoliša. Sad, što se tiče baze podataka, znači različite su, postoje neke koje su kvalitetne, ali one kojima nismo zadovoljni. Podatke i informacije prikupljamo na različite načine, kroz direktne kontakte i tako dalje. Ne znam da li ovdje možda neko od kolega konkretno Veda, da li vi imate možda nešto više informacija o ovom pitanju, ako ste u prilici.
Izvinite, ja upravo u trenutku dok ste čitala, ne sam odgovarao na ovo drugo postavljeno pitanje, pa samo ako možete postaviti ponovo ste.
Aha, izvinjavam se, znači Đorđe je već odgovorio, samo ukoliko, evo da malo učinimo interaktivnijim, znači ukoliko imate neki dodatni komentar, koliko NVO mogu uticati na usklađivanje zakona o zaštiti okoliša i životne sredine po horizontalnom i vertikalnom nivou, obzirom da smo svjedoci svakodnevnog narušavanja okoliša i posebno ovo na koji način prikupljate informacije od javnih gradskih preduzeća, s obzirom da su baze podataka dosta neuređene u JGP, barem što se tiče
well organized, at least in Sarajevo canton. Well, I will respond in the following way. First, I agree with what was written. There is nothing to add. Unfortunately, NGOs, when there are public discussions on any issue and every law is going through this process, they are very little involved, while they are very strongly involved when we have public calls. So the purpose of NGOs often is to apply to public calls instead of participating in adoption of laws. So I would say that they were given an opportunity through the instruments that are clearly defined at all levels of adoption of laws, and through public consultations, they have opportunity to participate. Well, thank you for this. I will continue summing up the questions and answers, and you now proceed responding to the new questions. The next question was, what about strategic projects that are ongoing? For example, 5C motorway, for which we have the planning documentation and special plan for which but this spur had never been done, and as a consequence, the motorway is being built through protected area. Georgia responded, for certain plans that are in force, we did not develop the SIA because they were done.
Evo, za federaciju posebno, federaciju Bosne i Hercegovine, praktično ako je jako je teško reagovati jer bi sada trebalo uraditi reviziju plana i u okviru revizije uraditi kvalitetnu SEA. Zakon se nije odredio prema ovakvim situacijama. Moje razmišljanje je da čekamo postupak usvajanja novih planova ili reviziju postojećih kada će biti moguće uraditi korektnu SEA. Evo, nažalost, znači ovo je bio nedostatak našeg zakonodavstva u periodu kada se upravo radila prostorno-planska dokumentacija za recimo koridor, pa vjerovatno i mnogi druge projekte. Gospođa Kaja Peterson postavila je pitanje da li je bilo slučajeva, sudskih slučajeva ili sudskog procesuiranja, po osnovu toga da mišljenje nevladinih organizacija na SEA izvještaj nije bilo uvaženo ili da nevladine organizacije nisu bile uključene u proces SEA. Gospodin Enrique Cifres je odgovorio da u Španiji i nije moguće pripremiti SEA bez davanja mogućnosti nevladnim organizacijama da se uključe, ali to ne znači da u nekim slučajevima oni ipak nisu uskraćeni, odnosno da ipak nije dovoljno njihovo mišljenje integrisano u finalne dokumente. Mali lokalne nevladne organizacije često se žale da imaju kapacitet da budu uključene na nekim višim nivoima učešća ili na višim fazama učešća u planinskim procesima, međutim, u stvari da ih ne mogu se uključiti na tim višim procesima uključivanja građana, nego više na projektnom nivou. Pitanje za BiH, znači Kaja nam naglašava da je u stvari pitanje bilo upućeno za BiH kontekst i Đorđe Stefanović je odgovorio da nije upoznat znači sa sudskim slučajevima koji su povezani.
He is not aware of any court cases related to the SEA, but there are several cases that are related to the environmental impact assessment. This has been a brief overview of the questions answered so far. I think we have one more, or possibly not. Just 1 second. Ms. Krvavac, I think this was another question. We heard how the process of developing the spore is going on and what's the cooperation between the teams. And who is leading the spore process? Mr. Suljic responds, the process is officially led by the line ministries at the entity level, and the task of the consultant is to produce relevant documents, the reports, and provide assistance to the ministry in implementation of the consultations and public hearing. Is there a need to add anything to this? And to any of these questions or to add to the answers to the questions that were asked. Ms. Nežana, I apologize for joining in. We received another question. Yes, I saw it, but I wanted to give the opportunity to the panelists to add to what has already been responded. Ms. Barima Karabegovic asks, the gentleman from Montenegro mentioned that SEAP is done together with the National Energy Plan. Are we going to establish the coordination of the work of these two documents in Bosnia and Herzegovina too? Does any of the panelists have a response to this? Mr. Milija excused himself. This question is about Bosnia and Herzegovina, yes. Well, it is, since you addressed my colleague from the company, I will take the question. The main idea is that the main plan and the strategic impact assessment are done together and presented together. This should be the rule. However, it is often the case in practice, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but generally, that you have one consultant preparing the plan, the other is preparing the strategic impact assessment. Then the competent authority should require them to work together. The practice in other countries is not the best. Often the two plans are done without any communication amongst the consultants. As a rule, I repeat, is that it should be harmonized and it should be done together. Thank you. Thank you for this answer. I believe that with this now we have all the questions answered, and an interesting process that we have great expectations from is the process that is done under the ESAP, and this partially answers this question, and this is expected from this process. Mr. Enrique raised hand. I don't know if he wants to say something, to add something.
Yes, thank you. I cannot use my camera. I don't know why I'm not allowed. Okay, no, I would like to add to the previous comment that working in parallel had usually had a problem that the SEA mandate is to compare alternatives. And when in one side they are working on one proposal, very often they are not really a feasible alternative to be compared. And this is one of the problems of the SEA evaluation when the other teams are working focused only in the previous minded solutions or proposals. And this is a gap that must be solved. Perhaps the SEA has to start earlier than plan itself in order to put the limits on define the conditions for proposals, and not once the proposal is made and then evaluate, because the result was that the people don't like to waste the time working on solutions that are not selected. And then this process needs to be improved everywhere in Europe. Not this, it's not a local problem, but this is a problem of the conception, in my opinion.
Hvala lijepo, da, rano uključivanje javnosti je
Thank
svakako.
you very much. Early involvement of the general public is very important. It would be nice for the end if I can ask dear colleague Vedat Suljic to let us know, if it's specified already, what are going to be the events that will be organized to provide public insight and consultations regarding the impact assessment strategy. So just for the participants to have it in mind. Well, the three laws have defined the ways of conducting public consultations. The moment that we submit the drafts, the consultation process will start by allowing insight at the website of the ministry, and then we will have, there will be internal consultations between the consultant and the ministry. So in order to integrate the comments received into the report, and then during the public consultations, at the very physical event, the meeting for the purpose of public consultations, and the dates, it's not possible to talk about now, but odds are that it might happen in early November. We are talking about the opportunity for the general public to get involved. In this draft report, we will reflect on the ESAP and its impact on the components that we analyze. And then based on the feedback we get from ESAP, we can start finalization of the drafts SIA, and then allow the public consultations. And as a first
idea, it will happen in November. Yes, thank you very much. At this time, we don't know all the information. We don't know how the process will continue, but it's important for the participants, if they want to get involved, is that they regularly check the websites of the line ministries and on the ESAP web page, very likely. Vedat, while we are still here, I see that Ms. Krvavac asked another additional question to make it more specific, and how the process can be done in the Federation in the lack of the comprehensive regulations. George Stefanovic may respond to this based on the experience of the ESA process in the Federation. Do you have any concrete information about the work in Federation? Well, it will be done as provided in the law and the protocol that Bosnia and Herzegovina has ratified. And certainly there are areas that should be covered. So it will be done in accordance with the law, specifically in the Federation. After the first scoping report, which was adopted by the line ministry, in this case, the Ministry of Environment and Tourism of the Federation, up to the stage of developing the SEA report. And as I said just now, the public consultations. Okay, thank you. I hope this is a satisfactory answer for this point in time. Of course, there is room for the legislation to be amended, and there are standard practices defined in the protocols, and I can only hope that everything is aligned. At some point, this process may serve as the foundation for some new practices. Just in conclusion, I'll give the opportunity to the panelists to give additional comments to these questions from their point of view, if they want to. Well, I have spoken a lot, and that's not my favorite thing in the world, but I will try to answer additionally to this question by Ms. Krvavac. The law of the Federation on Environment Protection was adopted recently, this calendar year. And according to the law prescribes the adoption of bylaws. According to what I know and what has been published is that the ministry has already passed some of them, not directly related to strategic assessment. And now we get to the problem of capacities in the ministry. However, my expectation is that the ministry will produce the rule books that are required for strategic impact assessment relatively shortly. And that's the only thing I can say right now at this point. But the work is being done, it's ongoing, and hopefully the legislation will be in place soon. Mr. Enrique, do you have anything to add? You have a hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add a comment in general that is usually the NGOs represent one point of view that is has to be provided working for free against the structure of the administration and consultancies that are working and most of the meetings are done in working time, and then this is not a balanced situation. And it's, I think that the responsibility to represent the interest of the environment must not rest on the shoulders of people who is working for free most of the cases. And this is one issue that must be solved also. This is what my contribution. Thank you.
Najljepša hvala, za svakako da je bilo interesantno vidjeti.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to see this example of Spain, an example of a complex country. And for a moment, it reminded us that we are not the only ones who are complex, who have complex organization. Many of these processes are more advanced in Spain, and I hope we will get better too. So that would be all for this webinar. We are very happy for having received interesting questions, and our panelists managed to answer to most of them already in writing. So this discussion was to sum up the topic. The strategic impact assessment has raised a lot of interest, and to us who were organizing this was a bit surprising, I must admit. But now we have the indication, and we know that there is interest for work in this area, and I hope that we will include these activities in the ESAP, in all relevant strategies and action plans and in practice. So that would be all from the side of the organizer. Ms. Maja Maratic-Tiro cannot get connected. She just sent me a message that her internet has become so weak that she cannot she cannot close the webinar. So on her behalf and on behalf of the organizers of this seminar, I want to thank you all, to all the participants. I hope you'll find this documentation useful. And if there are any questions, you can use the ESAP address and the other communication channels that we have opened to talk to us. And I hope we'll continue our communication through the working groups and in future. Thank you and have a nice day.